Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar on chronic wasting disease tonight, featuring Cait Nelson. My name is Philippe. I'm the marketing manager here at BC Wildlife Federation. You're usually used to seeing our executive director, Jesse Zeman, doing the introductions, but he's unavailable tonight, so here I am. But that doesn't matter because it's Cait Nelson that you're here to see. She is the local expert on chronic wasting disease. And I want to just highlight the format. It's going to be the usual format, which is a presentation of 30 to 45 minutes, followed by a Q&A. If you're watching on Zoom, please use the Q&A function to ask a question. If you're watching on Facebook, please just comment in the post. Now, a reminder that Cait works for the province, but she is not an elected official. So she does not make the policy or determine the budgets. She will outline the issue and what we can do, however. So if you feel your blood pressure rising at what you are hearing, usually Jesse says contact your local MLA, but we can do one better this week. We can give people certainly on Vancouver Island the opportunity to talk to them and ask questions face to face. BCWF is doing a series of election town halls with representatives of various parties there to answer your questions. And these are happening on Vancouver Island this week. Parksville on Thursday, Nanaimo on Friday, Courtney on Saturday, and Victoria on Sunday. I will drop a link in the chat so you can check out the details for those after this webinar. We will also have more election town halls in the Lower Mainland in September. So those will be in Richmond, North Van, Abbotsford, and Surrey. Now back to Cait. Cait is a wildlife health biologist with the Ministry of Water, Land, and Resource Stewardship. She joined the BC Wildlife Health Program in 2006, and she leads priority disease monitoring, such things as chronic wasting disease and bovine TB. Now, she's dedicated to working with researchers, agency stakeholders, First Nations, and the public to ensure access to facts on priority wildlife health issues. And she's going to be talking tonight about chronic wasting disease, which is always a very popular topic with these webinars, and especially as hunting season gets closer and closer. So Cait Nelson, thanks again, and we look forward to hearing what you say. The floor is yours.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation and opportunity to share the information. These webinars are always such a great venue to connect with people and answer the questions that are out there. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. Does that look good? Okay, perfect. So yes, thank you for that introduction. I'll just be talking a bit about chronic wasting disease. I always like to kind of set the stage with, why we're so concerned about chronic wasting disease, but then I'm really going to focus on some of the new information now, given the detection of the disease in BC and the steps that we're taking to address that, and the information that's really important for folks to know, particularly hunters coming into this hunting season. There we go. Okay. So first off, I think everybody's aware of chronic wasting disease, what it is for the most part, but I always like to highlight some of the key issues that make it so challenging, just to kind of set the stage for what we're dealing with. So most animals that are infected with chronic wasting disease will appear perfectly normal. They'll look healthy. And so we call these animals silent carriers of CWD. This makes it very challenging because there's no signal for us that there's something wrong in the animals. And in most situations, it's very rare to see sick animals on the landscape because it takes quite some time for those symptoms to develop in these animals and to be obvious to people. So the only way to know for sure if an animal is infected is by having it tested. And we, unfortunately, still the only reliable way to test these animals is by collecting tissues from dead animals. And so if you harvest an animal, It may look perfectly healthy. Most of the animals that have tested positive in other places are healthy looking harvested animals. So there's not really any way to tell just by looking at the animal. Really important to submit samples. The other thing that makes this disease very challenging is its ability to contaminate the environment. And so an infected animal will shed the disease agent or a prion, which is an abnormal protein. These infected animals will shed these prions through their bodily fluids, so urine, saliva, feces, blood, and they can also enter the environment through carcasses decomposing on the landscape. And so infected animals can basically pass these prions to their surroundings and to other animals around them. But then those carcasses also play a role in the disease spread too, because people can move those parts around and introduce the disease to new areas. These prions can also be present in environmental material, so like contaminated hay or grain or feed. And this is just simply, happens because infected animals will shed that into their surroundings, and, hay products will be rounded up and moved around. And this is a concern for us in BC for sure, with import of hay and other grains and things that come in from areas with a lot of chronic wasting disease in the system, like southern Alberta. So once those prions get into the environment, they're virtually indestructible. They're resistant to disinfectants, to burning, to cooking. So infected meat is not safe after cooking or freezing. And these prions will then remain in the environment and will be infectious for a number of years. We don't actually know how long, but it could be upwards, over 10 or 15 years, certainly. So as far as conservation impacts, obviously this is a big concern with chronic wasting disease, but we don't tend to see those population level impacts right away. What we do see right away, what I say in both immediate and in the long term, are really the impacts to the people that rely on these animals. And so we see changes in hunting behavior, impacts to hunting practices, impacts to hunting related businesses, impacts to traditional uses of these animals, and access to game meat. And so there's that food security element as well. But longer term, this is when we really start to see those population level conservation concerns come into play. So long term, once the disease has had a chance to establish in a population, those impacts are going to be irreversible. So with this disease, unlike some other diseases on the landscape where it will have negative impacts to populations, but often populations may get a chance to recover. With CWD, we don't see that. There's just a continuous increase in the number of cases over time. And so that's why we say it's irreversible. Those populations aren't going to recover from this disease. And we have now, over a number of decades, seen the impacts in places that have been battling CWD for the longest, places like Colorado and Wyoming, where they're really starting to see these population impacts with declines in both deer and elk populations of anywhere from 3 to 20% per year. And over the last 20 years, they've lost almost half of so 50% of the populations, the deer populations. And so this is a scenario that we definitely want to avoid here in BC. The other really important aspect of this, and I think where a lot of the concern comes from and a lot of the barriers created to accessing game meat and that food security element, is concerns around, can this disease be transmitted to people? And are, CWD infected animals safe to eat? So I'm not a public health or human health expert, so we really rely on the advice from public health authorities. And what they say is that there's never been a documented case of CWD in people, but some of the research, and of course we can't do research in humans, other than just kind of monitoring what's happening over time. But some of the research that they've done in non-human primates have had some inconsistent results. And so ultimately, we don't know enough about this disease to rule it out completely. And so the advice from public health is that positive animals, any animal that is positive, infected with CWD, should not be eaten. And that's the case for human consumption and feeding it to your pets as well. So here is the current situation. This is the map from the US Geological Survey. It's a really great resource. They update the map every month. The gray areas are the free-ranging populations, cervid populations, and the yellow and red dots are the captive or the farm populations. So, we've been watching this disease, and I've been involved with this program for coming on 18 years, and the situation changed dramatically in that time, in some recent detections when it jumped the Rockies into northwest Montana in 2019. And since then, it moved into Idaho. And even just in the last couple of weeks and months, we've now had detections in northern Idaho and Washington, and then earlier in the spring in California. And so the main thing I want to show on this map, though, is that there's when these diseases pop up in places like California or Washington, or even that red dot up in northern Alberta there, that was an elk farm that became infected. That's just evidence of the disease's ability to jump, right? And so we do monitor the disease sort of as it moves across the landscape with live infected animals that are spreading the disease, but people have the ability to transport, whether it's an infected carcass or infected hay, and bring that material to new areas, and so the disease can pop up anywhere. And I think that's really important for us to keep in mind in BC, even though we know we have confirmed cases now in the southeast, but we have to keep an eye on the rest of the province as well because of this risk. So I mentioned these recent detections in Washington and northern Idaho. This is really significant for BC. That case in northern Idaho that was just detected last week was within 30 kilometers of the BC border, just south of Creston, if you drew a straight line down. So it is moving the disease further west. They're taking, it's the map on the right, that's the affected area in Idaho. They're taking some really quick action. This red area denotes a special hunt that they're going to carry out, I think, in the next couple of days to get some more samples to get a better understanding of the situation in Idaho. And we're working really closely with them to, to learn about the results of those. And that's going to inform our risk north of the border. And then, of course, the case in Washington as well, that was detected just outside of Spokane. So that's a straight line south of Selmo, I guess, again, moving farther west and increasing the risk level, as we move into the boundary country and Okanagan regions of BC. But still working really closely with Washington as well, waiting to see the outcome of their response and some targeted sampling to just get a clear picture of what the outbreak looks like down there. For us in BC, as everyone's aware, we had our first cases confirmed at the end of January of this year. Both cases were in the Kootenay region. The first was a mule deer buck that was a hunter harvest. That's the one farther south, closer to the Montana border there. And then the white-tailed deer doe, that was a road-killed animal picked up by a local trapper that was picked up just outside of Cranbrook. So both were in Management Unit 4-3. But very different ecosystems, different species. So not really clear if these two cases are related, if they're part of the same outbreak or not. We may, never know. But anyway, this is our focus. So the following those detections, we implemented our initial response over the last number of months. And basically, this is what we've learned. So we expanded surveillance and testing in these areas to try and get a clearer picture of the extent of the outbreak. So over the last number of months, we've really focused on testing road-killed cervids. We've tested over like 242. Probably that number is probably a bit higher now too, because we're submitting samples every week. Of course, roadkill is sort of the best or easiest to access sample right now. So working closely with highway crews and with local trappers to get those samples tested. We also did some targeted sampling in the immediate area around the 2 positive cases, where we harvested 49 deer. So 25 in one area around 1 positive case and 24 around the other positive case. And yeah, so far all of those have come back negative. So we've had no additional positive cases. So that's a really good sign. But as you can see from the map, I know things are kind of jammy in there, but because we're sampling roadkill, a lot of those points where we've collected samples are along the main roads, right? So there's a lot of space in between that, we're still uncertain of. And so that's why this hunting season is going to be so critical for accessing hunter samples in these areas so that we can get that information and determine if there's more positive cases in the area. But from the data we have so far, we've collected a really good number of samples, and we have confidence in our disease prevalence, we call it, the proportion of samples that we've tested are 0.6% within that management unit 4.3. And so that indicates that we have caught this disease very early. I think the results of this expanded surveillance over the last few months further confirms that. And so I think we're in a really good position to try and contain this disease because we've caught it so early and manage it before it really gets into these populations. But still, we need more samples to confirm sort of the full extent, identify where those additional cases are, because we know there will be additional cases, we just haven't found them yet, but we need to identify them so we can zero in and really focus in those areas. So, as I said, there's a number of things we don't know yet, but there are definitely some risks that we do know, and these are things that we're really trying to mitigate right now. And so the main risks that we're faced with right now are the disease spreading to new areas, disease transmission within the population, which is really going to be the driver for disease spread, and then this risk around human exposure. And I'm not really going to talk about the human exposure because I'm going to leave that to the public health experts to advise on. We're really going to focus on the disease spread and disease transmission and how we're going to mitigate those risks. So disease spread, as I mentioned before, obviously the disease can spread on the landscape through infected live animals that are shedding the prions into their surroundings and direct contact with other animals. But that spread will be contained to the animal's range. It's the human movement of contaminated material like carcasses and hay and even contaminated equipment and tools that really poses a risk of spreading this disease to other parts of the province where we're not focusing our surveillance, where we don't have this concentrated effort that we have in the Kootenay region right now. If the disease was spread and introduced to any other region in BC, we just don't have the same level of testing right now, and it would probably go undetected. So that's a really significant risk for us right now. And then, of course, the disease transmission. So the disease is transmitted through these populations through infected animals. And so what we need to do, what we're really focusing on in this hunting season, is to identify where those positive cases are so that we know where to focus. We know that there's other high-risk situations like high-density urban deer populations that we plan on proactively addressing, and then other things like attractants that bring animals into like artificial aggregation of animals, which can drive higher rates of disease transmission. So these are things that we do know about and we will address, but that key element of where those infected animals are, where those positive cases are, that's still a bit of a question mark, and why those testing and accessing hunter samples this season is going to be so critical. As far as the human exposure piece, we have links on our website to our public health colleagues that have more messaging around human exposure and human risk. And we're working together to make sure that, hunters can access those resources, how to safely handle carcasses, how to decontaminate your tools, those types of things. So we have some new hunting regulations, CWD regulations in place for the 2024 hunting season. And these will all be implemented within the CWD management zone, which is noted here on the map. So this is 14 management units in the Kootenay region make up our CWD management zone. And so we have carcass transport restrictions outside of that zone in place under the hunting regs. And then we'll also have mandatory testing for any animal that's harvested within this zone under a condition of the hunting license. And so I've got in the title there regulations and best practices. So I think it's important too to know that these topics around carcass transport and testing do apply to other parts of the province, and it is really important that we keep these in mind for proactive management. For sure, the movement of carcasses in other places, just be mindful of that and the potential risk. Even if there haven't been identified cases in different areas, just be mindful of how you're handling and transporting and disposing of carcasses. And same thing with the testing, right? As we encourage testing across the province, it's mandatory in this management zone, but still really encouraged in other places. So for the specific hunting regulations for the carcass transport, it's going to be any brain or spinal column, except for the tail, for that evidence of species. So for any cervid, deer, elk, or moose harvested in that management zone, those high-risk tissues, the brain and spinal cord, cannot leave the zone. Leaving those high-risk tissues at or near the kill site is what we're recommending. Transporting only the edible deboned portions. This is more of a best practices. This is not part of the regulation, but it is what we're recommending. And then, of course, the mandatory testing of deer, elk, and moose. So we've had mandatory testing in place in this area for a number of years. It's now extended to include elk and moose, and we've added 3 management units to our mandatory testing zone this year. So a little bit more on the carcass transport reg. We're getting a lot of questions around this. So basically, it's the brain and the spinal column that can't leave that management zone. But these parts can technically be transported within the management zone. So if you harvest an animal in 4.3, you can transport all the parts back to your residence in 4.20. So it can move around within the zone. It just can't leave the zone. However, we do want to prevent the spread within the management zone as well. And so that's where the best management practices come into play, leaving those high-risk tissues out or near the kill site or disposing of them safely in the landfill. And also this deboning animals. A lot of the other jurisdictions with CWD have implemented these types of restrictions where they actually require deboned meat. We've had that import regulation in place in BC where you can only, if you harvest an animal in Alberta, you have to debone the animal before you bring it back to BC. But for BC, for within this management zone, right now, that's just a recommendation. And basically what we're getting at there is the safest thing to do is limit the material that needs to be disposed of. So if you're taking sections of the animal home, processing it, and then you have this waste material, what are you going to do with that? Any part of the animal can contain CWD, and so there's a risk if that is not disposed of in a safe manner that there's potential for introducing the disease to new areas that way. So we've got the regulation in place to try and reduce that risk, but just understanding why we're doing it and sort of the facts behind it are really important to just kind of guide those best practices. Now, for retaining skulls for Euro mounts, we're also getting a lot of questions around this because you can't leave the zone with brain material, but there are ways to retain those skulls for Euro mounts on deer, elk, and moose by just submitting the tissues before you leave the zone and removing that brain tissue. And so we've got some more resources on our website if there's more questions around like how to do that. But in working with our partners with the different hunting organizations, they've indicated to us that this is it's definitely possible. But we recognize that it is a bit of an extra effort, but really what we're trying to do is protect these populations as much as we can and do everything we can with that goal. So our testing program, again, volunteering in most areas, but really encouraged across the province. And of course, we have most of our infrastructure set up in the south. But if you're harvesting a deer, elk, or moose, or caribou anywhere in the province, get in touch with your local CO or wildlife bio and ask if there's an opportunity to submit those samples, because the more we can build that knowledge and build the surveillance and monitoring in these other places, it will just be that much farther ahead as the disease risk increases. Mandatory in the CW management zone. So we've established a number of new freezer locations. Many of them are accessible 24/7. And we've expanded testing capacity in BC. So this is a really big step. We now have testing running through our BC Agriculture Lab in Abbotsford. And they have hired additional staff to support the submissions over the hunting season, because we are anticipating an increase in submissions, and we're hoping for this because we want those samples to help inform what we're doing. And so with that expanded capacity, our goal is to achieve a turnaround in results within 2 to 3 weeks of submitting samples. So that's a really significant improvement from previous years. If anyone has ever submitted a sample before, the delays were much longer. I'm not sure that we will be able to accommodate the 2 to 3 week turnaround in all areas of BC, because we really need to focus in those priority areas in the southeast. But even if you're submitting samples from other parts of the province, the turnaround time on those results is going to be a lot shorter than it has been in the past. Some more information, instructions on how to submit samples and where to look up your test results are all on our website. So, so a little bit more on this mandatory testing and some options for folks to like how to submit samples. So there's a range of samples that you can submit under the hunting license condition. So that ranges from the entire head. We require that the antlers are removed, so you can take the antlers off with the skull plate. And leave a couple of inches of the neck still attached, because those tissues that we need are at the back of the throat. For if you wanting to keep the upper part of the skull for a European style mount, for deer, you can just submit the low jaw. A lot of hunters are doing that now. Or you can pull the tissues. What we're looking for are the tonsils and the lymph nodes at the back of the throat. So there's a couple different options there, and then you can retain the parts that you want. For elk and moose, in addition to the lymph nodes, we need a part of the obex, or it's part of the brain stem, which is actually in the base of the skull. It's right at the opening if you take off that first vertebrae. And so if folks want to keep the upper part of the skull for a European mount, we're encouraging hunters to just collect that obex tissue. And again, we've got resources and videos online on how to do that. And then with the obex, you can submit the low jaw of an elk or a moose, or you can pull those lymph nodes and submit those to any of the freezer locations. So a number of different options for getting those mandatory samples in for testing. Of course, if you're wanting a Euro mount, and you're going to be leaving the management zone, then of course you'd also have to remove all the brain tissue from the skull. But it's possible to do so. Once you get to one of our freezer locations, we ask that you complete an ear card. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that process, and attach that to the sample inside the bag at those freezer locations, so that the tag and the sample goes inside the bag and is sealed, so that all that information is private. We've got some new videos. This is just like a screenshot of one of the videos we've put up on our website recently on these different options of how to how to submit samples for testing. So check that out. These are the actual samples that we're looking for. So on moose, elk, and caribou, we collect the lymph node at the back of the throat and that obex sample. And then on deer, it's the lymph node and the tonsils. And so again, you can submit the whole head. You could submit the low jaw on the deer. It gives us everything we need, or you can pull those tissues and just submit those in a bag. Everything just needs to be frozen and dropped off to those freezer locations. Again, with the elk, moose, or caribou, we do need part of that brain stem. So a brain stem and a low jaw works, brain stem and the lymph nodes, or you can just turn in the whole head with the antlers taken off. We also have a video on how to remove the lymph nodes and tonsils on the deer. We don't have a video yet for the elk or moose, but we'll get one up on the website shortly. So you can check that out. There's also lots of resources from other places of how to do this. So just a quick, cruise through YouTube, and there's a lot of resources out there. I indicated that we have some new freezer locations. So here's just a little screenshot of all of our freezer locations where you can drop off samples. So the yellow ones are 24/7 access. The blue ones are, probably more like within business hours, or, to call ahead. Most of the freezers are concentrated in the south, but we are expanding and adding new freezer locations all the time. So there's going to be an interactive map on our website where you can check to see where the nearest freezer location is. And I would continue to check throughout the season, as we're probably going to add more as we go. This is the ear card I talked about. If anyone's ever submitted a sample in previous years, you've probably filled out one of these cards. We've adjusted the card a little bit this year. It's mostly the same, but the important things to note here, there's a there's going to be a perforated strip on these ear cards that you can rip off and take with you, because that red number is how you look up your results on our website. So we've always just asked submitters or hunters to just take a photo with your phone of the card, and then you have that number handy, but now you can actually rip off that piece. And on the back, this is the reverse side. On the back of that area is a QR code, so you can go straight to the website. The website's also listed there. And then if you're interested in collecting your own samples, that's what this kind of box on the back is, you can fill out this area, this table on the back to indicate what samples you've collected if you're interested in doing that. Okay, the other thing we're going to ask hunters for, especially in the mandatory zone this year, but we encourage hunters from across the province to do this, is to submit your harvest location. And so again, this is really going to be important in that CWD management zone, so that we have better information about, if we identify additional positive cases, where all the negative cases are in relation to them. And that will help us to kind of quantify the extent of the outbreak and figure out, how many animals are impacted and in what areas. And so we're asking hunters, and again, that QR code will take you there. Basically, we're at the same page that you look up your results. There's going to be an online tool that looks like this, where you can enter your ear card number and drop a pin on a map to give us the coordinates for your harvest. So this will all be confidential. and it will only be used for our purposes internally, will not be shared publicly. So these are just for our research and surveillance purposes. And so we're asking hunters to submit this information this year as well. So all of this like surveillance data and collection of these harvest locations really important, but there's other pieces that are really important to kind of bring into this to help inform how we approach management in BC. And so we're reviewing all of our current knowledge and building on that data and knowledge that we have around animal movement and Indigenous knowledge of where these animals are, pulling all of that together right now. But of course, we have some knowledge gaps. And so we're working with some academic advisors and some experts from other places that are helping to guide sort of a CWD research program to build a research program here in BC to also help to support that science-based management of the disease. So obviously including the surveillance, but also looking at really key pieces around, cervid movement, how these populations are connected, looking at some landscape genetics. And then those human dimensions elements as well are going to be really important. So moving forward with management, we have the good fortune that, good for us, that other places have been managing this disease for a long time, and we've learned a lot about what's worked and what hasn't worked. And obviously there's a lot of examples out there where things have not worked, and we want to avoid those. But we've got some tools now. We have much better tools now in recent years that we can apply. And so our main goals for management here in BC will be guided by those expert recommendations, and then also informed and guided by the values and perspectives of our partners here. So we really, it's important that, to us that we are taking a collaborative approach and working closely with our partners in BC to build a management plan that's going to work for us here. So our main goals are to reduce that risk of spread to other areas. And so we're addressing that through these carcass transport regulations and disposal restrictions, which also extend to road-killed animals in these areas. And then we're going to move forward with reducing reducing the potential of the environmental contamination by limiting those high-risk populations, those artificial points of aggregation that can really drive increased rates of disease transmission. And so looking at things like urban deer and baiting and feeding and things as like real drivers for that disease spread. And after, with managing the actual disease in these populations and keeping those disease prevalence low, we really need to get that information. This hunting season is going to be critical to this, to access those, really focus on the hunter samples to identify where the positive cases are. And then we can really focus in and the recommendation from the experts is really you manage disease prevalence by removing infected animals from the system. And so we do that through hunting. But then once we identify those positive cases, then we can really zero in those immediate areas and do follow-up. And whether that's follow-up through a targeted harvest, like we did in the spring, and a special hunt, something like that. We're not certain of that approach, but once we have that information from this hunting season, from the testing this hunting season, we'll bring that back to our CWD, our collaborative team, and using the tools in our toolbox, figure out what the best approach is. But yeah, across the board, some really key elements to all of this is we need to have good testing capacity, which we have now built with, you know, in BC testing at the agriculture lab in Abbotsford. That's going really well so far. We need really good communication, which is something that we've always struggled with, but working again with our partners to everybody kind of being on the same page and helping to spread that message. The community support and particularly hunter support is essential to this. And then once the adaptive management is really about once we learn more and we get those pieces of information, we're positioned to shift and adapt based on those, based on that new information. So, you know, as I said, there's a lot of examples out there where things didn't work, but we do have some good evidence now, and examples where CWD management can work. And so places like, you know, we talk about Illinois, where now they have, you know, almost 20 years of data since their first detection, and they've managed to keep disease prevalence quite low relative to some other places like Alberta and, you know, Wisconsin, where they were not successful at suppressing disease. We do have some examples. And so we want to look to those, the actions that were carried out in those places and really learn from those. And so the advice coming out of the programs that have had success is like to really focus on harvest, like hunting strategies to manage CWD, access those hunter samples to identify cases, and then you can really zero in and do some targeted removals. But only like that targeted piece is really key, because you're only wanting to focus in on the areas where the disease is present. And so those healthy populations are unaffected by your management action. And in places like Illinois, they've managed to maintain great hunting opportunities over, you know, a couple of decades now, and things are shifting a little bit right now, and they're needing to evaluate what's going, but overall they've had some really good success and support from the hunting community over this, you know, 20 years of CWD management, which is really, I think, an indication of success. But key for us right now, again, we think we've caught this early, which is great, but we do really need to act quickly. This window of management is going to close on us quite quickly. What the evidence from other places have indicated is that management is only effective if you apply it below 1.5 disease prevalence. So that's less than 1.5% of the animals are infected, which is a very small number. And our data so far, the number that I reported earlier was 0.6%. So we're in that window, but it's not going to last. And so if we want to be successful in containing this disease, we do need to act quickly. The information from this hunting season is really going to be vital for us to be able to figure out what the next steps are. The goal is really to focus our efforts in where the disease is, and it's almost harder when it's at this, when you catch it early and there's few animals infected, because it's really hard to find them. But once we identify those cases, we can zero in on those and do our best to prevent the spread and manage the disease prevalence within those population units. So I just want to end with reinforcing this very, very important role that hunters have in CWD management. And it's been a very clear message from other places that, like, hunting is the most important tool in CWD management. Hunting on its own helps to suppress CWD by removing infected animals from the landscape. And so this is why it's really important that people continue to hunt in these areas, both because just the act of hunting on its own is helping to manage CWD. But then if we can also get samples, then we can learn from that, and that can inform our, like, science-based management of this disease. And so yeah, just really emphasize the important partnership there with hunters, yeah, so far our partnerships with the hunting organizations have been incredible, and I'm really grateful for that. But yeah, everyone plays a role in this for sure. So that's it. I just acknowledge that there's, a massive team of people that are working on this, and I'm grateful for all of those partnerships and everybody's contributions to that. So just acknowledging that, and my contact information is there. Please reach out anytime if you have questions or concerns. I'm really always happy to connect with people. And get your feedback on how we're doing and what we could be doing better. So thank you very much again, and hopefully there's some time for questions.
Thanks so much for that, Cait. That was great. A very informative session. And we do have quite a few questions here. They break down into broadly into the categories of questions about cross-contamination and questions about testing, and then some questions about causes and history. We have a lot of questions about cross-contamination, so I think maybe we could start with that. Are other species affected, such as bear? Will other species in the future be subject to testing requirements? That's one question. And another one that's come up from several people: if the remains of the carcass are left at a kill site and eaten by coyotes or wolves, etc., will that lead to distribution of CWD through those animals?
Great questions. So yeah, to the best of our knowledge, other species outside of the deer family, so the cervids, deer, elk, moose, caribou, do not seem to be susceptible to disease. But we do know that like scavengers and predators can play a role through consuming infected animals. They don't become infected themselves, but those prions will persist through the digestive system and come out the other end, and they'll still be infectious. And so those scavengers and predators can spread the disease on the landscape. But we don't think that there hasn't been any evidence that they would become infected with the disease. And I'll just really quickly note, because this is not my areas of expertise, but there's some interesting work being done with CWD strains. And just like, with viruses and things, like there could be different strains and different evolution of strains over time. And they are seeing that with chronic wasting disease. And there's no evidence yet that it's going to cross those species barriers. But just the fact that like other pathogens, it does have the ability to evolve over time. So it's something that we want to just pay attention to. And there's a lot of researchers looking at that right now. And so we'll make sure that we have all the most current information as we're, assessing risk to other species.
Right. Okay. And that includes, I suppose, whether it could transmit to livestock as well, which was a specific question.
Yeah. There's no indication that it will transmit to, cattle or sheep. But yeah, there's no evidence yet that it would transfer.
Okay, excellent. When in terms of testing, what is the average turnaround time on results? And if a positive result is made, how long would it be until the result and location are made public?
Yeah, so of course we've had really significant delays in testing in previous years, but now that we have the testing lab at our agriculture lab in Abbotsford, the testing over the summer, and of course we're not submitting a large volume of samples, but in the road-killed samples that we're submitting, we're getting results back within 1 to 2 weeks. And so that's significantly faster than anything we've had before. So for the hunting season, the lab has indicated that they should be able to turn results around within 2 weeks from the time that they receive the result. And so of course, there's some work on the front end where we actually have to get the samples to the lab. We've hired additional staff in the Kootenays to run sampling sessions every week. And so we're going to be sampling every week and submitting samples at the end of those sessions. And so hopefully for the CWD management zone, the turnaround on results will be 2 to 3 weeks. For the rest of the province, we don't have the same capacity to run things that quickly. But still, I mean, hoping that we'll be able to get those samples into the lab as quick as possible. And if, if different hunting groups are keen on hosting a freezer and getting the training and actually collecting those tissues, then we can get those tissues submitted directly to the lab. And that will really help to expedite that process. Otherwise, we're relying on our contractors or regional bios that don't have a ton of capacity for that. But regardless, even in other places, it's going to be a lot faster than it has been in the past. If we can, if we can make sure to get samples in like within 4 to 6 weeks, I think it's going to be the longest people are waiting this fall.
Okay. And do people have to wait to eat the meat until a negative test result is received?
So for the CWD management zone, which is in a different risk level than the rest of the province, the public health, our BC Centre for Disease Control is recommending that people wait for a negative result before consuming animals harvested in the CWD management zone. The rest of the province, and that's a very conservative, we're really taking a precautionary approach there, not fully understanding the risk. Again, if you think about last year, over the last year, we've tested 1,200 animals, 1,200 cervids from the CWD management zone, and we've had 2 positive cases. So it's a very, very small proportion of animals that have come back positive. And we anticipate that we will get more positive cases, but it's likely going to be a very small proportion. So just keep that in mind. We still encourage hunters to process your animals, take them to your butcher, get that meat, safely processed and wrapped and in your freezer. And then, the advice is if you've harvested an animal from one of these higher risk areas to wait for that negative result. And hopefully you'll have that result within a couple of weeks before consuming that meat. For other parts of the province, we're not recommending that, but it's everybody's individual choice if they want to wait for a negative result for that peace of mind.
Okay. And in the case of a positive test result, would the lab reach out proactively to the hunter to inform them?
If we had a positive case, as is outlined in our surveillance and response plan, we are notified, the public health or the wildlife health program is notified of that positive result, and the hunters are our very first call. So we are going to reach out directly to that hunter to notify them of a positive result before anyone else is made aware of it. So the lab will contact us directly, and then we call the hunter. And so we're not going to call everybody with a negative result, but if we get a positive result, we're going to contact the hunter immediately.
Okay, excellent. Right. Will there be an opportunity maybe in the future to have some kind of non-invasive testing kit, or maybe have the butcher test it for you when you take the animal there?
Yeah, that's the dream. There's a lot of work right now in trying to develop those rapid tests or non-invasive tests, antemortem tests. We call them, like when you're testing live animals, or non-invasive tests of other parts of the animal that's not necessarily like tissues in the head. Unfortunately, those tools are not yet reliable enough to do testing, and so there's some work being done to advance those tools in the research realm. But the results are just not reliable. They're still getting, they're highly sensitive tests, right? So they still get some false positives and so it's not something that we have access to now, but I hope down the road, and hopefully not too far down the road, we're going to have better tools for testing, for rapid testing, animal side testing, something the butchers can do, and the testing of environmental samples too, I think will be really useful, because right now we have no way to test hay for the presence of prions, and that would be really helpful if we had a way to test hay before it's imported into the province. So yeah, down the road, fingers crossed that we'll have more tools available.
Excellent. There is a question about anonymous submission. Is that a thing? Is there an opportunity to do that? And if not, does it create a bit of a blind spot for poaching and roadkill?
Yeah, I mean, if people want to submit something anonymously, we'll still test it, but we have no way to notify the submitter of the result, whether it's positive or negative. And so, yeah, that's a tricky one, but I can understand that there might be some hesitation. We've worked with some groups, and actually, no, nobody's really taken us up on this, but if you wanted to submit a sample like on behalf of a club that you're part of, or some of the First Nations that we work with are submitted on behalf of the nation, and then they keep the personal information private. There's ways to do it, but I would be interested to, if someone was interested in, had questions or concerns around that, if there was a way we could work through that, that would be my preference, so that we have a way of reporting back.
I guess there's a few questions about our again, this is a forward-looking one. Are scientists working on a cure or vaccine, and is targeted hunting the only tool right now to remove infected animals?
So, yes, people are working on vaccines, but unfortunately, there hasn't been much success with the development of a treatment or a vaccine. Unfortunately, some of the results of those efforts will just prolong the disease. And so the animal's still infected and will die, but just lives a few months longer. So it's not ideal, especially if you think about the way the disease is transmitted and shed from infected animals, you actually don't want to extend that period where the shedder is existing on the landscape. So, there's still efforts to move forward, to develop a vaccine, but we haven't seen it yet. I'm sorry, what was the second part of that question?
The second part of the question is targeted hunting the only tool
Right.
to remove infected animals? So
Yeah, and so there's a number of different tools for removing infected animals, and there's definitely the more aggressive approaches, utilizing sharpshooters to go in and take animals out of an area. Those approaches have been less supported, and so really I think it's important to find a plan that to develop an approach that everyone can get behind, and that can be sustainable, right? Because like you can't manage CWD 1 year and then just take a step back and see what happens. You really need to commit to a plan for the long term to have any meaningful impact. So it's got to be, and that was what happened in places like Alberta and Wisconsin, is they came out of the gate a little too aggressive, maybe. It was effective in slowing down the disease, but it was not popular. And so those efforts were halted. And unfortunately, the result is some really negative impacts to those populations. And they're in a very unfortunate position now, whereas places like Illinois worked with the hunters right from the beginning and developed a plan together that everyone wanted, and everyone could get behind. And that's why they've been able to be successful over the last 20 years. And so that's what we need to do here in BC, I think, is we have all the tools are on the table. And so once we have the information to really understand the situation and where we need to focus, then we look and see what tools make sense for that situation. And the focusing on the hunter harvest and doing a special hunt in a particular area has really come out as being the most successful approach. We've also learned that, from the early efforts in Alberta where there was sort of the more broad scale culling, that what they found was the disease is really clustered on the landscape. It's not evenly distributed, right? And so in those efforts, they were removing far more animals than they needed to. So if you kind of start by identifying the cases first through hunter samples, then you can zero in on those specific areas, and you know that because those cases are going to be clustered in that population unit, sometimes even a family unit, then you can zero in on there, and then the surrounding healthy populations are unaffected. So like I said, there's a few different tools in the toolbox, but the focus on the hunter strategies, special hunts, has seemed to be the most successful.
Okay. We've got a few questions about sort of the causes and history, like where was it first detected, and is there a specific cause to it? Now, I know some of your previous presentations, which can be found on our YouTube channel, go into that in more detail. Is there anywhere else that you would advise people to sort of turn for that info?
Yeah, sure. So, what would be a good, yeah, so, well, I could just give a quick overview that, yeah, the disease, the first documented cases of chronic wasting disease go back to the 1960s in a couple research facilities in Colorado and Wyoming. And at that time, they didn't know what CWD was. And so it wasn't actually described as a prion disease until, 10 or 15 years later. And for those first couple of decades, we just didn't understand the disease, or how it was transmitted. It's very different from other prion diseases in that it can get into the environment, and so that was a really complicating factor. And so anyway, it managed to spread in a number of different areas before they could really get a handle on it. And moved around a lot through, I mean, it spread through wild populations, but moved around a lot through captive farming industry. That's how it got into Canada, was through captive game farmed elk in the 1990s, came into Saskatchewan, and that was sort of the start of our disease outbreak in Canada. But yeah, but there's some good resources out there that the US Geological Survey, their Wildlife Health Center, has some good information on chronic wasting disease and kind of the history. There's a good website, CWD Alliance has a good like overview of CWD in North America. So yeah, so there's a lot out there, and I think a lot of the resources kind of give a bit of a history of kind of where it's come from. And so yeah, there's a lot out there, but I definitely, as you said, in previous presentations, I had focused a little bit more on kind of how it has spread over the last couple of decades, and yeah, so you can check that out too.
Okay, excellent. So we know that deer don't pay much attention to international boundaries, obviously, and we know that in the United States there is a lot of federal and state money that's used for wildlife management. I know you can't comment on funding, but the question is, do you think the BC government is prepared to spend more money on CWD, or will it be a struggle to get funds? And if you can't answer that, then maybe just generally, is there a difference between, BC and how it's approaching this issue versus what's going on in some of the northern states?
Yeah, so yeah, I can't really comment on what kind of provincial government funding is going to be put towards this, but I can comment that we have some amazing collaborations both in BC and with partners in other jurisdictions. And it's no secret that some of our colleagues to the south in the States, have access to bigger pots of money. And so we've definitely, through different, we have representatives from Idaho and Montana on our CWD committee. And then I'm also part of the Western Association of Wildlife Agencies CWD committee, which includes all the Western states and provinces. And through those connections, we can partner with American colleagues to apply for some American funds. And we are pursuing that to help us out here in BC, and those communities, sort of in the wildlife health world, and all these groups that are battling CWD, everybody is very just really incredible, generous, and wanting to support one another. And so that's been a really positive experience for me. And now seeing, like, with Montana and Idaho and Washington and California, seeing what they're going through, and we're sharing information and opportunities, and trying to figure out how to support one another. And so so we're always seeking those types of collaborations, and with our partners here in BC as well. I mean, the BC Wildlife Federation has been an incredible ally in this effort for 15 years, and has helped us when we really needed it. And so I think those partnerships are really key to this, and doing the best with what we have.
Excellent. Couldn't agree more. Definitely. Wondering if there's anyone who has any other questions that they haven't asked yet. Please, you got kind of a last chance here to get some in. I think we've answered most of them that have come up. Again, a few more about whether other livestock could be affected, and also whether it makes sense to leave the spine and bone matter at the kill site where predators will continue to spread. Would it not be better to take the bones to the same spot to be dropped off at one of your sites? That's
Yeah, and it's a good question. It comes up a lot. And I think the idea behind leaving those high-risk parts at the kill site is that if the disease is in that system already, then you're just contributing to that, the situation in that system. It's moving those parts elsewhere and introducing the disease to a new area that we want to avoid. But, if we wanted to be the safest, disposing of those high risk parts, even in a landfill, really centralizes that disposal and gets it off the landscape. And every landfill is a little bit different, but we're working really closely with the landfills in the Kootenay region, and they've been great and understand, like, to bury that material right away so that scavengers can't get into it. And so really that would be safest. It's not always practical for everybody to be able to do that. And so leaving it at the kill site is a reasonable approach, because we're not moving it and spreading the disease to a new area.
Okay. So hunters need the information on how to test and how to go about that. Is that available in BC regulations? How easy is that to get for people not watching?
Yeah, I would go to our CWD website. So I don't know if you can include the link, but it's just gov.bc.ca/chronic wasting disease. And that's going to be kind of the one-stop shop for all of these resources. And we've been working on overhauling the website over the last few weeks to get some new material on there with the new videos and everything. And so I think that would probably be a good place for folks to go and look for some more instructions on how to collect the samples and that whole process. And if you don't find the information that you need, then my phone number is on the website. Give me a call. Let me know if it's helpful or not helpful and what you'd like to see up there. We really appreciate that feedback. And then if I can connect you with the information that you do need, through another source, then I can do that.
There was a deer study in migrational patterns in BC done a couple of years ago. Is that something that your teams looked into? So, for instance, the migration through the Kootenays into other areas?
Absolutely, yeah. So we're working closely with our like regional biologists in the Kootenays that are, really the experts on the animals in that region and where they're moving and how they use the landscape. And so, yeah, definitely doing a review of all of the current data that we have around animal movement, and then working to fill some gaps in knowledge, and hopefully we'll be deploying some more collars and doing that population genetics project to just like get a better handle on that animal movement, and how, because that animal movement and population structuring is a really important way for us to predict potential pathways for disease to move, right? So we can forecast kind of where we think the disease might move next on the landscape. So pulling all that information together is critical, and yeah, working really closely with the experts right now to make sure we've got all of that information solid.
Nice. And just if we can clarify this again, their butchers are not able to test for CWD. This is something that hunters have to do directly. That would be something to see down the line, hopefully, but
Correct.
that's not the case at the moment.
Yes, yeah, we have a couple hunter or a couple butchers in the province that are collecting samples. One of our CWD coordinator that's up in the Peace region, in Fort St. John. He actually is a local butcher there and is collecting samples, which is incredible. If anyone's up in that region, he's able to collect the samples and submit them directly to the lab. So that's a great relationship that we have. But it would be great if we could build more systems like that. But the standard is that butchers generally don't do that service for us. But they will often just host a freezer so that we can, so that it's convenient for hunters if they're bringing their animal in to be processed. They can drop off the head or the samples at the freezer, and then that will make its way to us.
Okay, excellent. Listen, Cait, thank you so much for your time. It's been a great presentation and a great Q&A session. We've got a lot of very eager people asking questions here. They're hunters who are definitely eager to be allies. If you do you have any sort of closing statement or message you want to share with us?
Yeah, just gratitude. Thank you for this opportunity, and for your members and the audience tonight. I'm just really grateful for your interest and your questions, and yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. I really do think that this is an issue that is going to require team effort, and so those partnerships and working with communities and hunters is really our best chance of protecting these animals, the populations, from the disease. So thank you for this opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you, Cait. And to those of you watching, if you really value the work that Cait and her team are doing, and you want to let elected officials know how much you value it, then don't forget about our election town halls coming up this week in Vancouver Island and in the Lower Mainland in September. And I've shared a link in the chat for that, and more details on that. And obviously the info is also on our website. Again, Cait, thanks so much. Great work. And we look forward to working with you again in the future.
Thank you. Thanks so
Thanks
much.
everyone for
Take
watching.
care. Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.